So hey guys, welcome back, and in this video we'll be covering a very fundamental topic for any programming language, that is loops. And you'll find yourself using them quite a lot. So it's important to understand the concept behind why we use loops, what are loops, and also how to implement them. We'll consider two types of loops in JavaScript: for loops and while loops. We'll implement them, we'll take examples as well. But first let's understand the theory. So we'll go to the whiteboard. Let's say that I have to print out a line. For example, I have to print names of different students, right? I have to print maybe, let's say, 1,000 students, right? I have to print their names. So I'll have to use console.log, right? And here I'll provide the name, XYZ, whatever it is. I'll provide the name. Let's say I'll have to do the same again and again for a number of students. So again and again. But you see, I'm repeating the same line of code while just changing a single thing, the name. Or let's say I just want to print all the numbers from 1 all the way till 1,000. So I'll have to write 1,000 lines of code and all of them will be almost same. I'll just write console.log 1,000 times and I'll just change this XYZ to 1, 2, 3, 4 and so on 1,000 times. But isn't that a tedious process? Isn't that repetition? Aren't we just writing the same copy and paste code? Even if you use like copy and paste, you'll still have to do that 1,000 times. Isn't that a very tedious process? It's very slow, and that's where loops come in. What we are doing is basically trying to do a same thing again and again with different I do agree that this variable, this XYZ, is different every time, but still overall we are doing the same thing. And this concept of repeating something, this concept of doing same thing again and again until a certain condition is met. Let's say I wanted to print 1,000 numbers, right? So that 1,000 is a condition. I only wanted to print till 1,000, right? So that's a condition. So I want to do something, like in this case I want to print something and I want to do it until a certain condition is met. And as long as that condition fails, I stop that loop, right? So that is what loops are for. Just implementing a few lines of code, just repeating something, right, for a certain condition. So we'll see this with an example, for example. And here I've written the syntax for loop and while loop. We'll implement both of these right now. In for loop, we have this syntax. We first write the for loop. Then we give these three things: initialize the condition that we want to follow. Like as long as this condition is true, the for loop will execute. As soon as this condition turns false, this code will not run, and anything below this code will run. The for loop will stop. Okay, and this increment and decrement, we'll see what that means in a minute. Similarly, in while loop, the concept is same. We are still going to run this block of code. Again, this curly braces represents the block for this for loop, and in this case this block represents that it's connected to the while loop. So anything inside this block, any code like console.log, or it may be something else, you are defining new variables, you are performing arithmetic operations on them, you're printing something out, anything inside this will run as long as the loop runs. Okay, so this is what a block of code means. Now while loops are very similar, right, since it's a loop. Now only the syntax is different. So we write while, then we write the condition inside these brackets, and then we give the code that we have to repeat. And inside this code we also increment / decrement, right? Instead of doing this in the same line, we have to do it inside the code. Otherwise what will happen is, if we don't give this condition, it will just keep on going till infinity. It will create an infinite loop and it might crash a computer. We'll see an example of that as well. But don't try to run that infinite loop for a long time. It will crash a computer. All right. Okay. So let's go back to the Visual Studio Code and let's run some examples. Let's try to implement for loops and while loops here. So for our syntax, for loop, in first case we initialize. That means our starting value. We have to initialize the loop with something. Then we have to give the condition. Then increment and decrement, right? We have to increment and decrement. and then we have to write a code. Our code, let's say I just want to print out a number, right? Let's say I want to print 10 times maybe, let's say. Okay, so that's our thing. So I want to run this line for 10 times. So the condition is I want to run it 10 times, right? So for that, what we'll do is let's create a variable, let's say I, and let's say I initialize it to 0 first, or maybe let's say I initialize it to 1. Then I'll give the condition that I want to run this loop as long as I is less than 10, or maybe I is less than equal to 10. So it starts from I starts from 1, and now this for loop will run as long as this condition is true. That means I is less than equal to 10. This for loop will run. This code, this block of code will run as long as this condition is true. Now, the next thing we have to do is increment and decrement. See, if I don't change this I, how will it go all the way till 10? Okay, so here what we do is we give a certain operation to change I. For example, I is equal to I plus 1. Every time the loop runs, I want to increment I want to increase it by 1. Okay, in some cases you might want to decrement it. Okay, so what happens is, let's actually dry run this code. If I run this code again, you'll see that 1 is being printed 10 times. Okay, so that's how for loop works. Let's see again, like for example, if I decrease I by 1, so what will happen is, in each loop I will get decremented by 1. So if initial value of I is 1, the next time it will be 0, the next time it will be -1, then -2 and -3, and each time this condition will be checked. After changing it, like for example it's 1, the next time it will be 0, so it will check the condition, is 0 less than 10? Yes it is. Then it will run this code. Then again it will go back here and it will decrease. So from 0 it will get converted to -1, and now it will check the condition again, is -1 less than 10, and it's true, right? And the thing with this I is equal to I minus 1 with decrementing in this case is that if we are reducing 1 by any number, right, it will keep on going on, and this condition will always be true. And in such cases where the condition is always true, we tend to create infinite loops. Okay, if I run this code, you'll see now that this keeps on going on. Okay, it won't stop. It's the condition is always true, and since it's always true, we are in an infinite loop. To stop this, I can just change it to 1. So as long as it reaches 10, it will stop. As long as it reaches 9, it will stop, because I've given less than 10. So now, instead of printing 1, let's try to print I. Okay, since we have defined the variable I here, we can access it anywhere. Actually, instead of defining it here, we can also define it inside the loop. So where we define where I equals to 1, and then we print I. So we'll see what happens. Here you see numbers 1 through 9 are getting printed and not 10, because I have set it to less than 10. So this code only runs when I is less than 10. The less than 10 means 9, right? We are only taking integers. So what happens is, first, let's actually try to dry run this. Let's try to understand what happens. First, I is set to 1, right? Initially, I is set to 1, and then it checks this condition. Is it less than 10? That's true, right? It's less than 10. So it runs this console.log I, and you see 1 is printed. The next time, instead of going down in the further code, like for example, if I have another code written here below, instead of going down, what it does is it goes back. It goes back and runs this, increments this, increment or decrement, whatever it is, it runs it. So now I will be increased by 1. There are other ways of writing this as well. You can use the assignment operators like this, or specifically for incrementing by 1, there are 2 operations like this, I plus plus. This basically means increase I by 1. So, and I minus minus basically means decrease I by 1. So all these 3 different ways are basically used for the same purpose. So for now, let's just write I plus plus. This will increase I by 1. So this I will become 1, right? Will become 2, right? Now the condition will be checked. It is 2 less than 10, then that's true, right? So again, this code will be run. So you see 2 is printed. Again, it will go back it will increment I by 1 and this I will become 3. The condition will be checked, 3 is less than 10, so 3 will be printed, and again this will happen until when I is 9, it will happen, right? When I becomes 9, like this loop goes on and eventually I becomes 9, this code is run, then when it goes back, I is incremented by 1 and then I becomes 10. But in that case, is I less than 10? No, right? I is equal to 10. So in this case, the for loop doesn't run and it gets exited at that point. And then anything below this for loop will be run. Or if you don't have anything, nothing will be run. That's the end of your program. So that's how the for loops run. And this condition doesn't have to be this, what can I say? This simple, okay? It's just one condition, but you can also write, for example, if I have I less than 5 and I less than or greater than 0. So I want I to be between 0 and 5. I'm checking that condition. So you can have complex conditions like this. I can also provide an OR here. I can write something else, right? So it will check the result of this condition. If it turns out to be true, anything inside this block of code will be run. And if it turns out to be false, it will exit out of the for loop and run the rest of the program. So that's the basic logic of how for loops work and how they are implemented here. Now let's try to implement while loops, right? Now in while loops, we saw that their syntax was something like this. And here we write the code. Now you understand what condition means, right? For example, if I have a condition, a basic conditions, let's say I not equal to 10. I start I by 1. Again, we are doing the same thing, initializing something, giving it a condition, and now we write our code. Let's say again, I want to just print out I. Okay. But now what will happen? See, this console.log will be run a number of times, but we are not changing I. We are not doing anything. So again, this will create an infinite loop. See, I is equal to 1. So when this condition is checked, 1 is not equal to 10. So yeah, it's not equal to 10. This condition will be true and this code will be run. Then again, it will go back. It will check the condition. And again, this block of code will be run. So this creates an infinite loop in this case. So we have to do something so that I changes, right? So here I'll write this again. In for loop, we were doing the same thing in the same line, but in while loop, you have to do it on separate line inside the while loop. Okay. So what this does it, every time the while loop is run, after printing the console.log statement, this I++ will run. It will increase the value of I by 1. So in the first time when it is run, 1 will get printed out because right now the value of I is 1, right? Then this will increase the value of I by 1 and assign it to I itself. So now here the value of I will get increased by 1 and it will become 2. Now the code will run and again it will check the condition. So is 2 not equal to 10? Then yes, it's not equal to 10. The code will run again. So it will console.log out 2 since I is 2. Then it will increment again. So I becomes 3. Then again the condition is checked and so on and so forth. And then eventually in the 9th iteration, this I will become 9. Here it will become 10 after incrementing and this condition will become false because it is equal to 10. So this condition will be false and this will end the while loop right here. If a code is written here, it will continue with the program, or otherwise it will end the program here. You can try to run this code. You'll see that 1 through 9 numbers are printed. Okay, so that's the basic concept of loops. That's the basic syntax and how we implement for loops and while loops in JavaScript. I'll have more videos on how to solve some questions using these loops so that you better understand so that you get a better understanding of loops. But for now, that's all we'll cover in this video.